Welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, Tommy Duncan.
And this is actually our very first show for the new year, 2019.
Happy 2019, everyone.
Welcome. Happy New Year, everyone. So today we're going to discuss the black man and whether the black man now is at a point where we are holding back the black woman. I don't know if that's true or not, but let's see if we can't put our heads together and figure it out. And then some things that we can do as black men to help change that calculus.
So you bring up a pretty interesting topic, especially for starting off the new year. So the question is whether the black man is holding back the black woman. And I guess the question is, why is that even a question or a thought?
When you look at half of black boys don't graduate high school, and then we already know there's a disparaging number of black women graduating from college versus black men. Just black men and women on college campuses. Women outnumber black men. And then when black women graduate, there just doesn't seem to be enough pedigree, degreed black men out there for all of the black women who are college educated, who want a college educated black man.
Okay, I get it. And especially when you talk about the low graduation rates, especially in some of the larger urban neighborhoods, I think typically the suburban areas typically have a little bit better graduation rate among black men. But if you talk to many black women, you know, and this, regardless of what part of the country you're in, one of the issues is finding someone who can match them not only in terms of economics, but in terms of professional pedigree and a lot of those other areas. And so that is something that a lot of folks are quietly and not so quietly talking about. And I guess the thing that I always want to talk about is, you know, what is the cause and effect? And is this a symptom of a problem, or is this the problem?
Well, it's a symptom of a problem, so it's not the problem. But it also, with that kind of disparity in education levels, in income levels, it interferes with the social norms of the male-female relationship when you're talking about traditional marriages. Generally, the expectation is that you have a strong father figure, husband figure, who's more of the decision maker, direction setter, protector for the family. And when you have income that plays into that, I've seen several studies that show that most black women, almost 80%, do not want a man in their life who makes less money than them. I don't care what people say publicly, which is politically correct. Secretly, I think deep down, women are a lot more traditional. They still would like the man to be the breadwinner for the home, but if she makes more money than him, because she has more education than him, then that sort of messes up that calculus a little bit.
Well, let's talk about how we get here and what's happening and why is the young black men, or, you know, black men in general, why have they been falling behind the black men, and what are the true causes of this? And then if we're talking about getting to a solution, we have to look at the cause and then focus on solving the problem and not the symptom.
Well, Tom, I hate to simplify the whole issue, but to me, the white liberal progressive socialist Democrat has been the biggest menace to the black community and us following their trends. We can no longer, and I say this with much passion, it may not seem, I may seem pretty stoic now, only because I'm getting over a really bad head and chest cold, but I can't emphasize enough how we need to get off following white people and their social movements. Well, I'll cut that out. We need to get back to doing the things that we know are the right things to do. We know we have to discipline our kids. We cannot discipline our kids the same way white people discipline their kids. We cannot get caught up in the same drug movements and social movements and women's rights movements that white folks do. That may work for them, but it's destroying our communities, it's destroying our families, it destroyed our schools, and now we're in such a big mess right now. I mean, this is a huge mess. There are no simple answers to other than roll the clock back. Let's go back to doing the things that we know are right for us.
Well, I mean, I parts of it I agree with, parts of it I would disagree with. I would definitely agree that what has worked for other cultures doesn't particularly work for the black community. There are folks who are on both sides of how effective integration has been, because the reality of it is our ancestors, our grandparents, great-grandparents have fought for freedom and access, but the reality of it is you look at the positives and the negatives of integration. It has created a lot of good things that we've been able to for instance, we've been able to obviously have access to some of the best educational institutions in America, access to opportunities professionally. But on the other hand, as we've discussed before, it has also systematically destroyed the black economy in America. And so as a result of that, there are some unintended consequences that come with trying to what we call assimilate into American culture. And that begs the question, well, what are the options here? You have to consider, okay, this is American culture, and to a certain degree, you're going to have to adopt some of the principles of it. But the question is, where do you draw the line?
Well, you have a good point there. And let me just say this when it comes to sort of political and social ideologies. The reason I don't put as much blame on the conservative Republican, because that's a party that generally stands for strong family values, strong work ethics, being responsible for yourself, less government, and that you are helping your fellow man out when you help yourself. When you're not burdening anyone else, that you are actually helping yourself. And when you look at the other side, the message is nothing's your fault. Everyone seems to be a victim here, which as long as you are a victim, you will never ever be a solution provider. You will not be able to think your way to the next step, to the next solution, to do anything for yourself, as long as you're feeling victimized. So the message is, it's not your fault. If you live in a high crime area, it's not your fault. Your mom and daddy are in jail, it's not your fault. The schools you go to, they're high crime areas, and no one expects you to come out there with a quality education. Nothing is anyone's fault anymore, but someone has to be at blame. You can't fix something. If you go to any of those self-help programs, the very first step is accepting some personal responsibility. You can't fix anything in your life until you're willing to say, I'm wrong. So we've got to be at this point now where we have to be able to say, and I'm not necessarily saying that the white liberal progressive socialist Democrat is an evil person. They're not. They're well-intentioned. But here's the problem I have with that whole movement, Tom, and I have for years, is that from slavery on to now, they've never ever, one, apologized for their role in the demise of the black community, the black family. They have yet to ever go back and look at any of their programs, and any of the things they've done to say, this didn't quite work out the way we intended, so we need to make some tweaks and changes. Never. They just keep doubling down on bad policies. And when a message that has been so wrong for so many years, you would think by now we at a point where we say, we've tried the socialist thing, we've tried this, we've tried that, we've tried managing the schools, that didn't quite work, we've tried managing economies, that didn't quite work. So maybe let's try something different, and that the states and the cities and the county should be laboratories for social experiment where we can see what ideas work and which ones don't. But from the left, all you get is a double, triple down on bad policies that have not worked, that continue to destroy life, and then people are mystified when we look up and say, well, what happened? How did we get here? So once again, my solution is quite a simple one. We have to step away from white folks, and to some degree, and get back to defining the things that work for us, and those values that work for us, and stick to them.
I got you. Well, I mean, there's part of that I would agree. There's part of that I would diverge from. I think that we get lost in the segmentation of white liberal progressive Democrats or ultra-right conservatives in terms of who is. There you go. Exactly. I think we get lost in the segmentation as to who's doing it. At the end of the day, what we do know history speaks for that, is that right after the Emancipation Proclamation, within the next decade after that, was probably one of the fastest growing times within the black community in terms of making progress, in terms of representation in government, in terms of our efforts to enfranchise ourselves by getting land and, of course, building economies. But the reality of it is, within a decade after that, around 1876, both sides of the equation, both the Union and Confederates, made a pact to say, you know what, one side, I'll get out of your way, the other side, we will allow you to take control of what you have in the South. And so I think that has happened several times, again, regardless of where we are in history. And so I don't know whether it's an issue of left or right. Where I would agree with you is in terms of us making a decision that we have to start making decisions for ourselves. And it may be painful in the short term, but if we're ever going to have an effective outcome in the long term, otherwise self-determination, having control over our destiny, building our own economies, we cannot afford to beg from the government or beg from any other culture of creature, any other culture of people, that which we can do for ourselves. And I think that really comes to the conversation of whether you're trying to assimilate or integrate into society, or if you're focusing more on self-determination and or nationalism, for that matter. And so people get confused with the issue. I think, to your point, we have to keep it very simple. I think the problem is finding that unifying line that enough folks within our community can agree upon, not only to say, hey, here are a couple of things that we can all agree upon, and begin to focus on things that are going to benefit the next generation and the next generation after that. But unfortunately, I think we get too segmented on Republican versus Democrat, rich versus poor, and all these other things that kind of keep our house divided.
Well, that is true too, Tom. You bring up some very good points, and on the division. So I would say, maybe one of the solutions is that maybe every couple of years we have like a Black Congress. We come together, and the purpose of that is to maybe identify not a whole list, a litany of stuff to try to fix, but let's go and say we're gonna have our 2020 Black Congress. We're gonna work on one issue. We're gonna fix one thing that we're gonna all agree on. And we're going to study that thing and debate it. We're going to shout at each other. We're going to laugh and cry together. But in the end, when we walk out of the convention, that we will have some principles, some rules in place that we're all going to agree to try. I mean, it's not, of course, no one's going to be looking over your shoulder and saying, oh, you violated Rule 3A there, so you get tapped on the wrist. But it's something that we can use as a guideline to start trying to put the pieces back in place.
I would tend to agree with you on that, and the question is only, where do you start first? So if you do focus on one issue, because we have so many different problems that we are forced to have to tackle within our community, the question is, what is the number one priority? There you go. You got education. You got well, what does that mean, though? There are a lot of things that you can talk about in terms of your children. You can talk about education of your children. You can talk about how you're raising your children. You can talk about a variety of different topics in terms of how we are raising our children to become strong leaders.
Right. But education, you're right. I mean, starting with the children is such a broad topic, but then that can branch off into 100 other categories, which is why we have to have lots of people working on this at the same time. So we can't all be in every meeting. So while one subcommittee is working on children and education, somebody else can be working on discipline and other interaction, punishment, how to get your children's attention.
I have a thought, Jimmy.
What's your thought?
There are a lot of different topics, but I think the number one, in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the number one issue that we've got to address is unity.
Yeah, Tom,
there are a lot of things.
I agree with you.
Unity is the number one.
The number one thing that's killing us overall.
Absolutely. In my opinion, unity is the number one issue that if we don't address, everything else doesn't matter.
But Tom, that is such a big well to try to eat.
Well, for what it's worth, most other cultures who have been successful in our country have figured that out.
That is you're going to have so much denial going on. So many people saying it's not an issue, that's not true. So much finger pointing back and forth.
But You're probably right, but the question is, what is it that you cannot see that does not point to the fact that we are totally disconnected? And when I say that, I say, okay, let's speak about our local market, the DFW market. If you look at Dallas, you can go any place in America, any place in the DFW, much less America, and find a mainstream community that addresses the needs of the white population in America. You can go to any grocery store, you can go to any car dealership, you can go any place. If we look at our local markets, any place in the country, you can find a Chinatown where you can get your cultural needs met in terms of food, in terms of service, whether it's insurance. You can go to practically any place in the country and you will find what they call a Little Mexico, just on Jefferson Street, downtown Dallas. You can find a complete...
On Legacy, I stopped and eat lunch one day. There were about 20 or 30 little restaurants in the food court. Tom, not one menu in English.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, my thing is this. I don't understand the argument that would not point to a lack of unity being our biggest problem, because you can find a Chinatown any place in the country. You can find a Little Mexico any place in the country. I mean, the Jews have their own network of businesses as well. And so...
The gay and lesbian community have their little network of businesses that they patronize.
Look, man, if they can take down Kevin Hart...
Poor Kev.
But I've heard someone is trying to bring him back as the host for the Oscars. But I think, you know, it is huge, but I think it is the centerpiece of what we've got to fix.
So when we do this, since we're running short on time, and we certainly want to give the time to this subject matter that it deserves, why don't we cut this episode, and then let's pick up on part 2, talking about unity.
All right, that sounds good to me.
All right. So, guys, please subscribe to our show. We want to say thank you to everyone who's watching. We're going to continue this conversation in part 2, so don't go anywhere. We need you to come back. When you do subscribe, if you click on the little bell, you'll get instant notification when new episodes are uploaded. So 2019, we're trying to focus more on solutions. So we need you to come back this year more than ever before and help us out.
Absolutely. And tell us, I mean, what is your opinion on the #1 top priority that you believe that we have to address now? We have our opinions. We want to hear from you as well.
Correct. Because without you, it's just our opinions mean nothing other than our opinions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, which is something to us.
There you go.
But outside of us, you know, I mean, there's not a whole lot of value without you. So we need you guys to chime in and say something. Now's the time to make yourself vocal. And we'll be back in part 2 of this conversation.
All right. Thank you, folks.
Okay.